The sky above Alaska was a deep, unbroken blue, the kind that seemed to go on forever. 30,000 feet below it, the air hummed with quiet menace. 4F. 22 Raptors streaked through the frozen air, their diamond formation slicing across the horizon with precision born from endless hours of training. At the center of their lethal geometry, an unmarked jet kept its course, matte black, no insignia, no tail number, its shape like a shadow given form. In the lead Raptor, squadron leader Azora Blackwood's gloved hand rested lightly on the stick, every muscle tuned to the moment. Her targeting system had already achieved lock. With a single squeeze of her trigger, the intruder would vanish in a fireball over the icy wilderness. 30 seconds, came the voice of Colonel Thaddeus Renwick from NORAD Command, his tone flat but edged with finality. In the command center 200 miles away, Senior Controller Delaney Vlaine watched the scene unfold across multiple displays. The radar blip representing the intruder cut a clean, unnatural path through the Alaskan Defense Zone. It ignored all hails. No transponder, no flight plan, no response. "This one's not Russian," Delaney murmured to herself, fingers flying across her console. She'd spent 3 years at NORAD's Nerve Center, long enough to recognize a bluff from a genuine threat. But this was something else entirely. Renwick stood beside her station, arms folded, his expression carved from granite. "Origin. Trajectory hints at Russian airspace," Delaney replied, scanning the data. "But the flight profile doesn't match any known military or civilian craft." On the main tactical display, the intruder's course looked as if it had been drawn with a ruler, weaving perfectly between sensor ranges, as though the pilot knew exactly where the blind spots were. "It's ignoring all emergency frequencies," Delaney added, her voice tightening. 3 attempts, no reply. Renwick didn't hesitate. "Deploy interceptors. Authorization Zulu 7. At Ellendorf Air Force Base, the alert klaxons wailed. Azora was already halfway to her fighter before the order came through. She'd been restless since before dawn, an unease prickling the back of her neck, the same instinct that had saved her life twice over hostile territory. "Suit up," she called to her squadron as boots pounded across the tarmac. "Unidentified bogey in sovereign airspace. Orders are to force it down or neutralize." Lieutenant Orion Calloway fell into step beside her. "Bet you a month's pay it's the Russians probing our response time again." Azora shook her head, pulling her flight helmet into place. "If it were them, they'd make sure we knew it. This one wants to stay invisible." She reached inside her flight suit and touched a worn photograph, her personal talisman. 7 women in crisp uniforms smiled at the camera. One face was deliberately obscured. The engines roared to life, and moments later, 4 Raptors vaulted into the sky. The intruder came into visual range 10 minutes later. Against the sunlight, it looked like a piece of night sky torn loose and set adrift, sleek, utterly featureless, its movements smooth in a way that defied physics. Azora keyed the squadron channel. "Fox 3, on my wing. Fox 2, hang back. Let's see what it does." "This is the United States Air Force," she transmitted on open frequency. "You are in restricted airspace. Identify yourself and follow us to designated landing coordinates." Only the hiss of static answered. "I say again, identify yourself immediately, or we will take defensive action." Nothing. At NORAD, Renwick's jaw tightened. "Final warning, squadron leader. Then weapons free." Azora's eyes narrowed. She couldn't shake the sense that she'd seen this flight style before. The intruder's tiny course corrections were too deliberate, like a signature written in the sky. Delaney noticed it too. Her gaze flicked between readouts, recognition stirring in her mind. Without waiting for orders, she dug into the classified archives, a level of clearance most controllers never touched. Lines of redacted text blurred past until a single file froze her breath. "Colonel," she called urgently, "I need you to see this." 20 seconds. Renwick's voice cut in over the comms to Azora. Azora's targeting reticle blinked green. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Something's not right. 10 seconds. Delaney's heart slammed in her chest. She turned her monitor so Renwick could see the grainy photograph in the file. The image of a woman in a flight suit, eyes sharp, smile faint. The caption, Commander Elone Frost, presumed Kia. 5 seconds. Azora's breath was steady, but her gut screamed at her to hold fire. The radio erupted in static. Then, through the crackle, a single word emerged. Phantom. Azora froze. Repeat, she demanded, hardly trusting her ears. The voice came again, stronger now. Call sign Phantom. Authorization Indigo Black Star 0. In the NORAD command center, the room went utterly still. Renwick stared at Delaney's monitor, at the face in the file. The most decorated covert operations pilot in Air Force history, lost over the South China Sea 3 years ago. It can't be, he breathed. The black jet suddenly banked right, performing a maneuver so complex it left Azora's squadron in awe, a move only one pilot had ever mastered. Azora eased her Raptor alongside until the cockpit glass was close enough to catch a glimpse inside. An oxygen mask hid most of pilot's face. But the eyes, those eyes, were unmistakable. They were the same ones in the photograph tucked against her heart. The same eyes she and her fellow pilots had. Deliberately hidden from public view, not out of shame, but out of unshakable hope. All units, Renwick's voice came through, now laced with disbelief. Clear airspace and provide escort. Authorization level, midnight. Sir. Calloway's confusion was palpable. Stand down, Lieutenant, Azora said quietly, off-threading her voice. That's not an enemy. She switched to a private channel she hadn't used in 3 years. Welcome home, Commander. The secure hangar at Ellendorf Air Force Base was already on lockdown when the matte black jet touched its wheels to the tarmac. Armed personnel stood shoulder to shoulder along the perimeter, weapons held low but ready, their eyes tracking every movement of the alien-looking craft. Azora Blackwood led her squadron down in formation, engines roaring overhead before peeling away toward their own hangars. Only she remained close enough to watch the intruder's final approach, the enigmatic shape rolling to a stop with eerie precision. Inside the command center, Colonel Thaddeus Renwick barked orders into his headset. Clear all non-essential personnel. Seal the hangar. No recordings, this is eyes only. Even without the order, word had spread through the base like wildfire. The Phantom in the sky had a pilot who was supposed to be 3 years dead. General Zephyrin Blackwell arrived moments later, her presence a silent confirmation of how high the stakes had risen. At 64, she carried the aura of a commander forged in decades of crises, wars, political storms, and betrayals. The sharpness in her eyes suggested she was already calculating outcomes, contingencies, and the chain reactions that might follow whatever was about to happen. The cockpit canopy hissed open. A gust of cool air spilled out, carrying with it the faint tang of ozone and something unfamiliar, like burned metal after a lightning strike. The figure inside moved slowly, each motion deliberate, as if the weight of 3 years pressed down on their limbs. A helmet came off, revealing close-cropped hair and a face both familiar and altered. A jagged scar traced a line across one cheek, cutting through the memory of what she had been. Commander Elone Frost stepped down the ladder, boots hitting the ground with the solid certainty of someone who still owned the space they walked into. Shackled to her wrist was a metal case, its surface battered, the lock glinting under the hangar lights. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the echo of her boots as she approached the assembled officers. Her gaze swept the room with surgical precision, reading every expression, every unspoken thought. 3 years of silence, Commander, General Blackwell said, her tone even but charged. You were declared killed in action. I had to be, Elone replied, her voice low and rough, whether from disuse or something more sinister. They were watching everything. She lifted the case slightly. This holds evidence, names, accounts, communications. A conspiracy inside our own intelligence community. 3 years ago, I didn't go down in the South China Sea. I went dark to hunt the truth. With her free hand, she produced a key and unlocked the case. Inside lay a compact, high-security data drive, the kind designed for field collection under extreme conditions. "These," she said, "are the receipts. Senior officials selling classified flight paths and security protocols to foreign buyers. When I found out, they tried to kill me. I spent the last 3 years gathering enough proof to make sure they couldn't just bury this." Blackwell examined the drive briefly before looking Alone dead in the eye. "And you came back here instead of leaking it to the press. Why?" "Because the wrong kind of truth in the wrong hands destroys more than it saves," Alone said simply. "This has to be handled quietly. Controlled arrests. Contained trials. No mass panic. No tipping off anyone still at large." The hangar was silent except for the faint hum of the cooling jet. Then, without warning, General Blackwell raised her right hand in a formal salute. "Commander Frost." It rippled through the room like a spark through dry grass. One by one, every officer saluted. Some faces held awe, others shame for having believed the official reports. Colonel Renwick was among the last, his salute paired with a subtle nod that might have been an apology. When the formalities ended, Azora stepped forward. From her flight suit, she pulled a creased photograph. 7 young women in fresh Air Force Academy uniforms smiled at the camera. 6 faces were visible. One was obscured by a fold of the picture. "We never replaced you," Azora said quietly, holding the photo out. Alone's gaze lingered on it. "You kept this." Azora's voice softened. "We knew you'd come back." For the first time since stepping out of the cockpit, a flicker of emotion crossed Alone's face. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the photo, as though it were something fragile. Later, in a secure briefing room deep within the base, Alone stood at the front, the data drive now in military intelligence custody. A projection screen lit the wall, behind her, with satellite imagery and intercepted communications. "Operation Blackfish began as routine surveillance," she explained, her voice steadier now. "We were monitoring shipping patterns in the South China Sea when we intercepted transmissions of classified flight paths. They were being sent to unauthorized recipients, coordinated, encrypted, and invisible to normal detection." "Who gave the order to stand down?" Renwick asked from the table. "General Vernon Hale," Alone answered without hesitation. "The same man who declared me dead when my aircraft vanished." A murmur ran through the room. Hale had retired 18 months earlier, with full honors. His name had been untouchable, until now. "I had to disappear," Alone continued. "Fight from outside the system. If I'd stayed, they'd have buried me for real." She gestured to the projected data. "This is the result. 3 years of following the money, the communications, the dead drops. 12 high-ranking officials, spread across 3 branches of service and 2 intelligence agencies." General Blackwell studied the data on her tablet. "And the evidence?" "Detailed. Account numbers, meeting recordings, digital fingerprints. Enough for airtight convictions if we act now." The air in the room felt heavier. Everyone understood the stakes. A conspiracy this deep could shake the military's foundation if it ever went public. When the meeting adjourned, Renwick lingered as the others left. He approached Alone with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You were right," he said finally. 3 years ago, when you came to me with suspicions, I told you to drop it. Follow protocol." Alone's gaze was level, and that protocol almost killed me. He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older. "I should have listened." "They had contingency plans for everything, Colonel," she said. "Even your disbelief." Outside the briefing room, Azora waited. "Commander, your quarters are ready. Medicals on standby for evaluation." As they walked, the sterile corridors felt foreign to Alone, like a place she knew in another lifetime. "4 of us are still here," Azora said quietly. "Me, Calloway, Taven, Quinn. The rest reassigned after you were declared dead." When they reached her quarters, Azora hesitated before speaking again. "One question, Commander. Why wait until the last second to call in your code today? 5 more seconds and I would have fired." Alone set her few belongings on the bed and met Azora's gaze. "I needed to know if the chain of command still recognized me." If they didn't, it meant the rot was worse than I thought. You risked your life on a test. I've been doing that every day for 3 years, squadron leader. Today wasn't any different. The secure conference room in Ellendorf's sublevel had walls of reinforced steel and an electromagnetic shroud that rendered it invisible to any form of surveillance. Inside, the air was heavy with a sterile scent of recycled ventilation and the unspoken weight of classified truths. Commander Alone Frost stood at the head of the long table, posture rigid despite the fatigue in her eyes. Before her, an array of satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and financial transfer logs glowed on the projection wall. The metal case that had been shackled to her wrist was now empty, its contents in the hands of military intelligence. Operation Blackfish, she began, her voice carrying the clipped precision of someone who'd rehearsed the truth in solitude for years, was never meant to expose what I found. We were tasked with monitoring unusual shipping activity in the South China Sea. That's where I intercepted the first encrypted packet, flight paths that shouldn't have been leaving our own systems. Her fingers tapped the controls, and a set of coordinates bloomed across the map. These were not just any flight paths. They were classified infiltration and exfiltration corridors, routes we use for covert transport, black ops, and nuclear deterrent patrols. Whoever had them could bypass our defensive grid entirely. Colonel Renwick's voice cut through the stillness. And you reported this breach? Yes, Alone said flatly. Directly to my superior, General Vernon Hale. His response was an order to stand down. No investigation, no alerts to other commands. Just silence. At the far end of the table, General Zephyrin Blackwell leaned forward. And you believe Hale was compromised? I don't believe it, Alone replied. I know it. With a flick of her wrist, she brought up a series of still images, grainy surveillance shots of men and women in unmarked meeting rooms, their faces partially shadowed. Each image was annotated with time, date, and location. These are the primary actors. 12 high-ranking officials across 3 branches of service and 2 intelligence agencies. They sold our operational secrets to multiple hostile buyers, Russia, China, and several non-state actors with enough resources to bid high. The projection shifted to financial data, a spiderweb of accounts spanning offshore havens, shell corporations, and laundered funds. This is the payment trail, Alone continued. Every transaction tied back to a proxy account controlled by someone in this room. She let the silence stretch, her gaze sweeping over the assembled faces. Not literally this room, but our chain of command. A low murmur passed among the officers present. The implications were staggering, not just treason, but a coordinated betrayal embedded deep in the military structure. Renwick sat back, his jaw tight. Why didn't you come to me? You knew I would have listened. Alone met his eyes. Because they needed me dead. And if they knew I'd told you, they'd have come for you too. She advanced the presentation to the next set of images, grainy infrared footage of her own downing over the South China Sea. The footage showed a sudden flash, a spiraling descent toward the water, then static. I staged this, she said. I used a black budget prototype I'd been working on, cloaking, advanced ECM, non-standard flight profile. Once I disappeared from radar, I went off-grid. No comms, no contact. Only one person knew I was alive, Captain Lyra Merritt, Comms Division. She maintained a secure drop for data. 4 months ago, they found her. The report says suicide. It wasn't. General Blackwell's expression darkened. We have the forensics. You're right. It wasn't. Alone's tone hardened. Her death forced my hand. I accelerated the timeline, consolidated the proof, and came home before they could erase the last witness. Blackwell's attention was locked on the scrolling dossier on her tablet. This evidence is enough for simultaneous detentions, if we move carefully. Yes, Alone agreed. We do it quiet. No headlines. No tipping the rest of the network. Controlled arrests, closed tribunals. The goal is neutralization, not theater. Admiral Niall Riviere entered mid-briefing, a tall figure with eyes as sharp as his pressed uniform lines. Alone didn't flinch. If anything, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. History stood between them, layered and complicated, but neither let it surface now. "We've reviewed your files," Riviere said, moving toward the table. "General Hale is already in custody, picked up at his mountain home 2 hours ago. He's in a black site under counterintelligence protocols." The room reacted with a ripple of subdued surprise. Hale's name had been synonymous with untouchable authority. His fall was both a victory and a warning. Alone allowed herself the briefest exhale before returning to business. "If Hale is the highest-ranking compromised officer we've identified, he won't be the last. Someone else had to keep the network running after he retired. That's who we find next." Riviere studied her for a moment, then said, "We want you to lead the counterintelligence effort. You've already done the groundwork. You know their methods. You know the players." Alone's brow arched slightly. "With respect, Admiral, I've been operating outside the chain of command for 3 years. My methods aren't exactly in the manual." Blackwell's voice was sharp. "Orthodox methods declared you dead and let traitors sell our secrets for profit. We're not looking for orthodoxy. We're looking for results." A knock at the door interrupted them. Azora entered, carrying a sealed folder marked with the highest classification level. She handed it to Riviere. "Preliminary analysis of the aircraft, sir. Engineering team's findings." Riviere flipped through the pages, eyebrows rising. "This technology is a decade ahead of our current deployments." "Necessity breeds innovation," Alone said simply. "When you can't trust standard channels, you build new ones." The Admiral closed the folder and looked between Alone and Blackwell. "You'll have full operational control. Personnel are at your discretion. Funding, unlimited. I want this cancer cut out completely." Alone's eyes met his. "When do we start?" 6 months of controlled chaos had stripped the conspiracy down to its bones. Piece by piece, Commander Alone Frost's team dismantled the network she'd hunted for 3 years. The arrests were quiet, surgical extractions conducted at odd hours, suspects removed from offices, homes, or weekend retreats. No sirens, no public spectacle. Press releases cited early retirements and strategic reassignments, but behind closed doors, the detainees were facing closed tribunal charges that carried the kind of weight only national security could demand. By the time winter crept over Washington again, only one name remained in the center of Alone's map, a single pulsing node marked in red. Codename Kingfisher, she told Admiral Niall Riviere as they stood in the Secure Operations Center beneath the Pentagon. A holographic display floated between them, mapping out the last threads of the conspiracy. Red lines marked the flow of stolen intel. Blue traced the financial channels. The single red node seemed to breathe, waiting to be severed. "Real identity, Harlan Voss," Alone continued. "Former NSA, retired 8 years ago. Since then he's been the broker, the man connecting compromised officials to foreign intelligence services." On the display, Voss's image appeared, distinguished, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. The kind of man who could slip through an embassy party unnoticed, while carrying the means to cripple a nation's defenses. Azora Blackwood, now serving as Alone's second-in-command, stood at her shoulder. "We have confirmation he'll be in Geneva next week for a private security conference. It's the cleanest shot we've ever had at him. Isolated, predictable movements, minimal security once he's inside." Riviere nodded. "Full resources. Your team, your discretion. Bring him in alive. We'll need him to roll up whatever's left of his network." Alone's mind was already turning over the moving parts. Team composition, entry and exit routes, contingencies for civilian interference. Her years off-grid had honed her paranoia into a sharpened tool. Nothing was assumed. Everything was checked twice. "Geneva will be loud," she said finally. "We'll go in quiet." The week before the operation blurred into an endless cycle of planning. Surveillance dossiers, hotel floor plans, conference itineraries, and flight schedules were cross-referenced until there was no room for error. Alone personally reviewed each operative on the roster, handpicked specialists whose loyalty was to the mission, not to career politics. On the final night before departure, she sat alone in the empty briefing room, eyes on the operation timeline projected before her. The door opened quietly, and Admiral Riviere stepped in, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting one beside her. Alone gave him a small nod. "Old habits. In the field, thoroughness kept me alive." For a moment, silence hung between them, weighted by the history they didn't speak of. Then Riviere said, "Once Voss is in custody, the tribunals can begin their final phase. And then we rebuild." "Systems can be rebuilt," Alone replied, her eyes still on the display. "But systems can also be corrupted by the same people meant to protect them. That's why the human element matters more than any protocol." He smiled faintly. "You sound like you're quoting my own Academy speech back at me." "I am," she said without looking up. They moved before dawn, a small team slipping into Geneva under the cover of the conference's international arrivals. The Swiss winter air was crisp, the streets outside the venue dusted with a thin layer of frost. Inside, the hum of quiet conversations and clinking glasses masked the fact that some of the most dangerous minds in private security were gathered under one roof. Voss arrived precisely on schedule, flanked by 2 discreet bodyguards who blended seamlessly with the wealthy attendees. He moved with the calm assurance of someone who believed himself untouchable. That belief lasted until the elevator doors closed behind him on the 10th floor of his hotel and opened to reveal Alone Frost. Recognition flashed in his eyes, quickly masked by cultivated composure. "You should be dead," he said smoothly. "Many people should be things they're not," Alone replied. "Loyal, for instance." Voss smiled thinly. "Loyalty is relative. I served my country for 3 decades. What I did after was just business. Selling flight paths that got pilots killed isn't business. It's treason." His eyes glinted. "The world doesn't work in black and white, Commander. Only shades of gray." Alone stepped forward, her voice low and measured. "I'm not here for a philosophy lecture. I want the remaining nodes in your network, the ones you kept off the grid. Names, protocols, dead drops. And if I refuse, you'll face a closed tribunal with a chance at a reduced sentence. Or," she let the word hang, "you'll stand trial for treason in a public court. Every detail will come out, every pilot, every mission you compromised. Your legacy will be ash." For the first time, his mask wavered. They'd never risk a public trial. Too many secrets would spill. Alone's gaze was ice. "Test me." The extraction was clean. Voss vanished from the hotel, without causing so much as a ripple in the conference below. By the time his absence was noted, an operative with a similar build and hairline had taken his place, ensuring the timetable stayed intact. In a secure facility outside Bern, Voss sat across from Alone in a room designed to be more comfortable than threatening, a tactic she'd learned often loosened tongues faster than intimidation. Hours of interrogation followed, a steady push and pull of pressure and silence. By the end, she walked out with the names she needed and the map of the network's last hidden corridors. That night, as the military transport carried her team and their high-value prisoner back toward Washington, Azora slid into the seat across from her. "Mission accomplished, Commander." Alone shook her head slightly. "This phase. We still have tribunals, sentencing, and restructuring. The fight isn't over." Azora's voice softened. "But you came back from the dead and tore down the network that thought it was untouchable. That counts for something." Alone turned her eyes to the small window. Clouds drifted below like ghostly mountains. "Not alone," she said quietly. 1 month after the Geneva operation, the conspiracy that had festered in the shadows for years was finally dismantled. The tribunals were swift, silent, and sealed under the highest classification. No news broadcasts, no public trials, only the quiet removal of dangerous pieces from the board. The sentences varied. Life in secure black sites for some, decades in military confinement for others. Harlan Voss, the last linchpin of the network, was locked away in a facility so isolated that even its coordinates were need to know. For Commander Alone Frost, the victory felt less like celebration and more like the exhale after holding one's breath for too long. The ceremony was held in a small, windowless chamber deep beneath the Pentagon. No podium, no press, just a handful of people who had carried the weight of the truth alongside her. General Zephyrin Blackwell stood at the front, the glint of overhead lights reflecting off the metal in her hand. It was a decoration that didn't officially exist, its design unrecorded in any public registry. The only proof of it would be the memories of those in the room. Blackwell's voice was steady as she addressed the gathering. 3 years ago, Commander Frost vanished from our ranks. Officially, she died in service to her country. Unofficially, she let the pause hang, her eyes moving across the faces present. Unofficially, she did something far greater. She kept her oath when others broke theirs. She stepped forward, pinning the medal to Alone's uniform. For service beyond definition. For integrity under fire. For coming back when we needed you most. Alone's gaze swept the small crowd. There were no politicians, no senior bureaucrats, only pilots, intelligence officers, and the operatives who had stood by her side in silence. Her voice, when she began to speak, was measured but carried the weight of everything she had endured. 3 years ago, I made a choice that cut me off from everything I knew. I didn't do it for recognition. I didn't do it for a medal. I did it because the right path is often the hardest, and it's almost never the one you get thanked for. She unpinned the medal from her own chest, turning toward Azora Blackwood. The next generation needs to know that, she said, fastening it onto her former student's uniform instead. Azora's eyes widened. Commander, you earned it as much as I did, Alone interrupted. You believed in me when you had no reason to. That loyalty kept me alive more than once, whether you realized it or not. When the brief ceremony ended, the group moved as one toward the surface, emerging onto the airfield in the pale light of an early afternoon. The sky above was a perfect, uninterrupted blue, the kind that seemed to go on forever. A sudden roar split the air. A formation of fighter jets streaked overhead, sunlight flashing off their wings. The pattern was flawless, except for the deliberate gap in the line. The missing man formation. Once, it had been flown in her memory, a tribute to a pilot believed lost forever. Now, it honored the ones who had fallen in the shadows, bringing the truth home. Alone stood beside Azora, their eyes tracking the jets until they vanished into the horizon. What now, Commander? Azora asked quietly. Alone's gaze stayed on the open sky. Now we keep flying. Someone always has to guard the boundaries. In the weeks that followed, Alone worked quietly from an office in a restricted wing of the Pentagon. She turned down every offer of public commendation. Her focus remained on restructuring, the same systems that had failed her once. She worked with Admiral Riviere and General Blackwell to tighten security protocols, close blind spots in surveillance grids, and ensure that the next time someone tried to sell the country's secrets, they would find no cracks to slip through. It was slow, meticulous work, the kind of effort that drew no headlines but made a difference all the same. At night, when the corridors were empty and the fluorescent lights buzzed softly in the stillness, she sometimes found herself staring at the small framed photograph on her desk. 7 women in uniform. 6 visible faces. 1 obscured. The face wasn't hidden anymore, at least not in her mind. She knew who she was again, and she knew exactly why she'd fought to come back. The day she finally stepped back into the cockpit of an F-22, it felt like returning to a language she hadn't spoken in years but had never forgotten. The controls fit her hands as though they'd been waiting. She took off alone, climbing above the clouds until the earth fell away beneath her. For a while, she simply flew. No orders, no target, no mission but the act itself. The horizon stretched in all directions, endless and untouchable. The same sky that had watched her disappear. The same sky that had witnessed her return. And the same sky that would watch over whatever came next.